Story 1. A familiar face in a strange place.
It was a chilly Friday evening, and I had decided to take a walk down the old forest trail near my house to clear my mind. The sprawling oaks and tall pines seemed like the perfect escape after a tedious week of work. With every step, the gravel crunched beneath my boots, and the cacophony of evening birds gradually faded to be replaced by an eerie silence. After about an hour of walking, I decided to take a detour, heading towards a clearing I hadn't visited in years. As I approached, the glint of a small campfire caught my attention. The flames danced, casting an orange glow across a man's face. He was sitting on a log, warming his hands, seemingly lost in thought. Curiosity getting the better of me, I stepped closer. "Evening," I called out, trying to make my presence known. The man looked up, his eyes widening in surprise. But then a smile crossed his lips. "Hey, don't I know you?" I studied him. Though the light was dim, something about his face did seem familiar. He looked just like an old friend from high school, Tom, whom I hadn't seen in over a decade. "Tom, is that you?" I asked hesitantly. He chuckled. "Yeah, it's me. Wow, it's been years. What brings you out here?" I explained my need for an escape, my desire for a moment of peace. Tom nodded understandingly, inviting me to sit with him by the fire. We began to reminisce, talking about old friends, memorable incidents, and how life had changed since school. However, as the evening progressed, a nagging doubt formed in my mind. There was something off about Tom. Though his stories matched up, there were inconsistencies in his demeanor, subtle changes in the way he described our mutual past. Sometimes his gaze seemed distant, almost predatory. To shake off my unease, I proposed a game, one we often played back in high school. We would take turns telling an unknown fact about ourselves, and the other had to guess if it was true or a lie. Tom agreed. "All right, I'll start. In the last decade, I've traveled to over 50 countries." I pondered, knowing Tom had always been an adventurer. "True," I responded. Tom smirked. "Wrong. I've only been to 48. Laughing, I took my turn. "I've written 2 books in the last 3 years. Tom paused for a moment, studying me. "False," he guessed. "Correct," I replied, grinning. "I haven't written any." The game continued, each revelation getting progressively darker. Tom's voice dropped low. "Once, just to feel the thrill, I followed someone home from a bar, watched them all night." I swallowed, unease settling in. "False." His eyes flashed. "True." The atmosphere grew tense. The warmth from the campfire now felt stifling. I tried to steer the game back to lighter topics, but Tom persisted. "My turn," he whispered, leaning in. "There's a grave, not too far from here, with my name on it." I stared at him, my heart racing. "False," I stammered, though I wasn't sure. He smiled, a wicked glint in his eye. "Why don't we find out?" Before I could protest, he stood up, gesturing for me to follow. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to run. But the familiarity of his face, the memories we shared, held me in place. After what felt like hours, we arrived at a small secluded spot in the woods. Before me was a gravestone, moss-covered and worn. I squinted to read the inscription, and my blood ran cold. Thomas Reeves, 1984, 2005. I staggered back, realization dawning. The man before me couldn't be Tom, but then who was he, or what was he? "See," the stranger said, his voice dripping with malice. "I told you we've met before." I bolted. Trees and shadows blurred past as I sprinted back towards the trail. Panic fueled my every step. The once comforting silence of the forest now echoed with the sinister laughter of the stranger. It felt like eternity, but I finally broke through the trees, the safety of my home in sight. I didn't stop until I was inside, locking every door and window. As I tried to process what had just occurred, my phone buzzed. An unknown number flashed on the screen. Hesitantly, I answered. A chillingly familiar voice whispered, "It was nice catching up. Let's not wait another decade." I ended the call, shaken to my core. Who, or what, had I met in the woods? And what did it want with me? Every rustle outside, every creak of my house, now held a foreboding dread. Because out there, in the darkness of the forest, a familiar face, a deceptive memory waited, reminding me that sometimes the past is better left forgotten.
Story 2. When in Rome.
It was during my trip to Rome when I met him, a tall man with silver hair and an almost regal demeanor. I was alone in a cozy cafe, struggling to read a local map. "You seem lost," he remarked, sliding into the chair opposite me. Startled, I looked up, meeting piercing blue eyes. "Just trying to make sense of this map," I replied, a tad defensively. "I can help," he offered, leaning over to trace a route with his finger. "I'm Luca." I introduced myself and we struck up a conversation. Luca was knowledgeable and charming, discussing everything from Rome's history to its hidden treasures. He offered to show me around, and I hesitated only briefly before accepting. Something about the way he seemed so sure of himself put me at ease. Our tour began in the bustling streets, with Luca pointing out landmarks and sharing fascinating tales of each. The more we walked, the fewer people there were, and soon we were navigating narrow, winding alleys. "It's just ahead," he whispered as we entered a particularly dim passage. I felt a pang of unease but brushed it aside, chiding myself for being paranoid. We finally emerged into a small courtyard, enclosed by tall, shadowed buildings. The place was eerily quiet, devoid of the city's noise. In the center stood a fountain, its water stained red, giving it the eerie appearance of blood. "I've brought you to Rome's heart," Luca murmured, his voice taking on a sinister undertone. He began to circle me slowly, like a predator stalking its prey. "This is where lost souls find their purpose." I took a step back, suddenly aware of the danger. But Luca was quicker, grabbing my wrist with an iron grip. "It's an old tradition," he hissed, pulling a gleaming knife from his coat. "A sacrifice for the city." Terrified, I struggled, trying to break free. In the scuffle, my backpack slipped off, spilling its contents. My camera, guidebook, and, fortunately, a small pepper spray can rolled out. Without thinking, I grabbed the pepper spray and aimed it at Luca's face. He screamed in pain, releasing me. Without looking back, I ran. Twisting and turning through the labyrinthine alleys, my heart pounded in my chest. Every shadow, every whisper of wind felt like Luca's breath on my neck. Suddenly, I stumbled into a bustling street, the comforting sounds of traffic and people surrounding me. Gasping for breath, I tried to explain to passers-by, but my broken Italian and sheer panic made communication difficult. Finally, a kind, elderly woman understood my gestures and called the police. They arrived swiftly, their faces grave as I recounted my ordeal. The oldest officer sighed. "We've had reports of tourists going missing in that area. We'll find this, Luca." But they never did. To this day, I can't forget those piercing blue eyes and that blood-red fountain. Rome's heart still beats, echoing with the whispers of lost souls, waiting for the next victim to join them.
Story 3. Echoes in the Blizzard.
It was the first time I was allowed to stay home alone. My parents had gone to a dinner party, and the snow outside created a picturesque setting, perfect for an evening of video games and pizza. The snow thickened into a blizzard as night descended. Trees became ghostly figures, and our neighbors' houses disappeared beneath layers of white. It was then that the lights flickered and died, the storm having its way. My courage wavered in the sudden darkness, but I remembered the flashlights in the kitchen. On my way downstairs, a soft knock broke the silence. Puzzled and a bit apprehensive, I approached the door, peering through the peephole. An obscured figure stood outside, hidden beneath a cloak of snow. "Hey, kid," a voice whispered from beyond the door. "I'm stuck out here. Can I come in?" Chilled, not by the cold, but by the strangeness of the request, I replied, "Sorry, I can't help." My parents will be back any minute. The knocking became frantic. Just for a moment, it's freezing. Fear gripped me. I can't let you in. Let me in, kid. Now. The stranger demanded. No, leave me alone, I yelled. The knocking stopped, replaced by silence, except for the wind's howl. I dashed to the study and grabbed my parents' emergency cell phone, dialing 911. 911, what's your emergency? With a trembling voice, I recounted the events. The dispatcher instructed me to find a safe place and wait, as an officer was on the way. I chose my parents' walk-in closet, sinking into a corner behind hanging clothes and shoes. The house was eerily silent save for the blizzard's muffled roars. Minutes stretched on until a new sound, the faint creaking of our back door, broke the silence. He was inside. Footsteps echoed through the house, drawing closer. Each step sent my heart racing faster. Where are you, kid? The voice taunted. The 911 dispatcher's soft voice was my lifeline. Stay quiet. The police are nearby. Soon, the ethereal glow of blue and red lights penetrated the snowy night. The footsteps and voice vanished, replaced by the authoritative calls of arriving officers. Emerging from the closet, I was met by two police officers, both wearing expressions of concern. One of them, a middle-aged man with graying hair, approached. Are you okay? I nodded, recounting the night's terrors. But as they inspected the house, something was amiss. The back door was locked, and there was no sign of forced entry. In fact, with the heavy snowfall, there were no footprints outside at all. It was as if the stranger had never been there. The older officer placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. The mind can play tricks in isolation, especially during a storm. It amplifies every sound, every fear. Confused and shaken, I thanked them, and they departed, swallowed quickly by the storm. Left alone in the echoing silence of my home, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The blizzard continued its symphony outside, but inside, the haunting questions remained. Had my mind betrayed me? Or had something, or someone, truly been there, leaving only whispers behind?